Hi, this is Allison Styring. I'm back again for another installment of Logistics in Field Ecology. Today, I'm going to be talking about a really common type of bird survey. If you're going to be looking at numbers of birds in different habitats, you're going to need standard ways to count birds. And the most common method that people use is something called a point count. Point count is pretty simple. It's a timed survey in which you stand at a point very quietly. You allow some time before your count begins to let things settle down after you've shown up at your point. And then you start a timed count. How long your count is depends on what you're counting. If you're counting like one species that's very common and you want to know numbers, you may actually do a shorter count, like a 5-minute point count. If you're trying to get an inventory of species, it might be longer, like closer to 10 minutes. If you're surveying really rare species, you actually might consider doing line transects, and I'll talk about that in a different video. So if I were to stand at this point and count all of the birds I saw and heard over a period of time, and then went out into a field and did the same thing, I would be facing a problem of those two types of points not being the same, because my ability to see and hear things is different in a thick forest versus an open field. And so it's really important to standardize your point count so that they truly are comparable between one habitat and another. And so one very simple way to do that is to do what we call a fixed radius point. And that is, you establish a perimeter around your point where you will only count the birds that occur in that perimeter. For a forest, 50 meters is about the maximum. You might be able to go out a little bit further. I'm going to show you one for 20 meters just for the sake of simplicity, although a 20-meter radius is pretty small. And so just remember, the smaller your radius is, the less likely you are to actually detect birds inside that radius. So you always have to balance it and come up with something that's reasonable. 50 tends to be a pretty reasonable in between. And so I'm going to walk out. We have some 50-meter tape. You can see it on the ground here. And I'm going to walk out to the point of 20 meters, okay? And we're going to flag that point. And so what I tend to do when I do these point counts, and most people do, is you might walk in all four cardinal directions for 50 meters and put a little piece of removable flagging up in a really conspicuous spot so that you can see the bounds of your point. I'm stepping over my tape right now. Okay, and so here I am, and it's important to walk straight, and that can make it a little time consuming, which is why we did this in advance. Here I am at 20 meters. Okay, and you can use some sort of flagging if you have it. If you don't, you might use shoestrings or string, something that you'll be able to see. I have some crepe paper here, like streamer paper from a birthday party, and I can use that to mark a point. Pink is actually really visible in a forest, and so I could tie this around my branch and use it to say, okay, there's my bound in that direction. It's important when you're doing this to always go back and remove your flagging. Sometimes you might do surveys where you're returning to points, but for these short field ecology projects, we generally recommend that you do more points rather than returning to points again and again. So it really depends on the project. So the tape that I use, this is actually large 50-meter tape here that I got from forestry suppliers. You can get it from a forestry supplier shop. If you don't have this, some people may have a tape that looks really similar that's measured in feet. If you do any landscaping or need have that on hand by any chance, you can use that. Just always make sure you note your units, that you're always using feet or meters. Ultimately, you're going to be converting everything to metric for the analysis and the scientific writing piece of it, because field ecology work is done in the metric system, but you can easily convert those units. Another thing you can do is take a piece of rope or string and measure it at home with a ruler or what you have, another kind of tape measure, and mark set lengths on that piece of string. Then you can wind it up and have a piece of string that's just 50 meters. You have your string and you wind it up, stick it in your pocket, take it out in the field with you, and do your measurements that way. Okay, and so that is how you set up a point count.